Dobro. History. Archive.
You know, some stories of survival are so extreme, they really force us to ask what it even means to be human. And the story of Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571 is absolutely one of them. For 72 days, its survivors were just lost to the world, forced to create a completely new one on a desolate glacier. So let's break down the anatomy of that miracle.
We're actually going to start near the end with this desperate note. It was scribbled on a piece of paper and tied to a rock. This was the very first contact with the outside world after 70 days of absolute silence. And to really get the sheer power of these words, we have to go all the way back to the beginning to understand the incredible, agonizing journey that led to them.
Okay, so to even begin to grasp what happened after the crash, we first need to understand who was on that plane. See, they weren't just a bunch of strangers thrown together by fate. They were already a cohesive social unit, a society, really, before they ever touched the snow.
And this right here, this is a key detail. The passengers were mostly members of the old Christians rugby team. They all shared this background, forged in an Irish Catholic school, one that emphasized not just faith, but a kind of, well, a muscular Christianity, a belief in physical discipline, a stoic resilience. And that shared culture, that built-in hierarchy from the rugby pitch, it would become one of their most vital tools for survival. But right before the unimaginable horror, there was this brief, almost mundane moment. They had a weather delay in Mendoza, Argentina. The young men were exploring the city, laughing, buying gifts. Nando Parrado even bought a pair of small red shoes for his nephew. These simple objects, these symbols of a life they completely took for granted, are just a stark, haunting contrast to the world that was about to end.
On October 13th, 1972, at roughly 3:30 in the afternoon, their world just ended. The flight didn't have a mechanical failure. It was a victim of a very specific, tragic kind of cognitive error known as controlled flight into terrain, which is basically when a perfectly good aircraft is unknowingly flown right into the ground.
The destruction was chillingly precise and devastatingly fast. The right wing hit the mountain, was ripped clean off, and then flew backwards, slicing off the plane's tail like a can opener. 5 people were just sucked out into the freezing air. The fuselage, now just this wingless tube, slammed onto a glacier at over 200 miles per hour, slid for half a mile, and then crashed into a snowbank. It went from passenger plane to mangled tomb in just a matter of seconds. 12 people died in the impact, but that was only the beginning. That first night, huddled in the wreckage at over 11,000 feet, the temperature plunged to 30 degrees below 0 Celsius. By the first morning, the number of dead would rise to 17. So after the initial physical shock of the crash, then came the psychological blow. A moment that would force the survivors to remake the most fundamental rules of civilization just to stay alive. This quote marks the exact moment their entire mindset shifted. On day 11, they heard on their little transistor radio that the official search had been called off. They were presumed dead. And in that moment of total abandonment, they found a new purpose. The hope of being saved was gone, replaced by this grim determination to save themselves.
You have to understand, the pressure they were under was just relentless. It wasn't one disaster, it was a series of them, one after another. First the crash, then hearing they were abandoned. And then, on day 17, a horrific avalanche buried the fuselage while they slept, killing 8 more people, including their captain. Each new disaster just pushed them further from the world they knew and deeper into this brutal new reality.
With their meager food supplies totally gone, they faced an unthinkable choice. And to survive, they had to intellectually and spiritually reframe one of humanity's deepest taboos. They drew on their Catholic faith, comparing the act to Holy Communion, the idea of taking a body to sustain life. And even more than that, they created a new social contract. Each person solemnly agreed that if they died, the others could use their body to live. It was no longer predation, it became a sacred pact of reciprocal survival.
After the avalanche killed their rugby team captain, the group's initial hierarchy it shattered. And from that wreckage, a new one was built. Not on past status, but on present-day function and merit. This was the birth of the Society of the Snow.
A new society formed, and it was defined by what you could call a radical meritocracy. Your value wasn't who you were back in Montevideo. It was what you could contribute to the collective survival, right there, right then. The strongest became expeditionaries, given extra rations to build strength. Others became workers, managing the grim logistics, and the injured, they were cared for by the group. Everyone had a role.
And this is the thing, they weren't just passive victims waiting to die, not at all. They were active engineers solving these incredible life-or-death problems with the scraps of their old world. They used aluminum from seatbacks to melt snow for water. They cut up the cockpit's plastic sun visors to make sunglasses to prevent snow blindness. Every single piece of that wreckage was repurposed for survival.
But their most critical invention, the absolute game changer, was this: a sleeping bag. They knew they'd freeze to death if they slept in the open, so they painstakingly sewed together quilted insulation from the plane's tail section using copper wire they pulled from the electrical system as their thread. Without this single piece of technology, born from just sheer desperation and ingenuity, the final expedition would have been completely impossible.
So 2 months of this unimaginable hardship led to a final, desperate gamble. On day 61, 3 men would walk away from the fuselage, carrying the hopes of the 13 they were leaving behind.
I mean, can you just imagine the feeling? After a brutal 3-day climb up what you think is the final mountain, Nando Parrado reaches the summit. He's expecting to see the green valleys of Chile. Instead, all he sees, in every single direction, is an endless, terrifying sea of snow-capped peaks. The co-pilot had been wrong. They weren't on the edge of the Andes. They were trapped deep in the heart of them.
Faced with that seemingly impossible truth, with that hope of a quick escape just shattered, Parrado's refusal to turn back is one of the most powerful moments of human determination in this entire ordeal. He looked at those endless mountains, and he chose to walk into them, saying he would rather die on his feet than wait for death back at the fuselage.
Fueled by scraps of human flesh and an unbreakable will to live, they walked for 10 agonizing days. Parrado and his companion Roberto Canessa descended from the high peaks until finally they reached a river, and on the other side, through the roar of the water, they saw a man on a horse. They had found the world again. Their impossible march had brought them back to the land of the living.
You know, the story doesn't end with the rescue. Those 72 days on the mountain cast a long shadow, and they ended up shaping the 16 survivors for the rest of their lives. Against all odds, most of the survivors went on to live long, full lives. Roberto Canessa, one of the medical students on the plane, became a renowned pediatric cardiologist, saving the hearts of children. Many of them, like him, felt they were living on borrowed time, and so they dedicated their lives to service and family, never ever forgetting the price that was paid for their survival.
And it's fascinating to see how our understanding of what happened has deepened over time. The first big film, Alive, was really an American action movie, focused on individual heroes. But the recent film, Society of the Snow, is considered definitive by the survivors themselves. It shifts the focus from the heroes who walked out to the collective society that made it possible. And most importantly, it honors the dead, whose sacrifice was the ultimate gift of life.
The story of Flight 571 really is a testament to something profound. When they were stripped of everything, food, shelter, society itself, this group of people didn't descend into savagery. They did the opposite. They ascended to a higher form of cooperation, of shared sacrifice. They proved that even when the world abandons you and the mountains try to bury you, the human spirit, working together, can indeed forge a path home.